Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Casper, it is a pleasure to have you back on the show.
It is a pleasure to be back. It is always a fun conversation we have. Although we hit a wide variety of topics.
I know we were talking about Disney off air, which I wanted to get your opinions on. Mostly, I wanted to kind of start off the discussion with really talking about Hollywood. I've been having a large interest in kind of how it's evolved, but also where during like the Depression era, you first started seeing a lot of union strikes and labor strikes happening around the time of like the 30s with Hollywood specifically when it came to the creation of the Screenwriters Guild and a bunch of other things. And you're in the acting industry. I mean, you're a voiceover actor and you did also commercials at a point. So you probably have a good experience and perspective on this.
I did. I started as an actor for. I actually did that for about 25 years. Like I was in all the the staples and all that kind of stuff. But they where I was in Vancouver, they used to call it Hollywood North because everything that used to come up from Vancouver was from L.A. And in the way it affected me, for example, is one of the first things my agent told me was lose you need to lose your Canadianness, and you'll work more because the work that's coming up here is is for that market. It's for the North American market. And the reason why Vancouver worked so well at the time was anyone in Butthole, Iowa could tell you what New York looked like or what LA looked like or what Miami looked like. So setting a show in Vancouver and just saying this is anywhere USA, you could do that for a long time because people didn't recognize you could have like downtown Vancouver and people didn't know what downtown Vancouver looked like. Even downtown Toronto, you got to know what it looked like. So X-Files did really well when it was shooting up in Vancouver, for example, because it was just anywherevilles USA. Now with the it's interesting where we were talking about Disney and you were talking about the strikes and stuff. Um, they had a where the actors in a way it's a it's a really weird system. Like an actor, when I first started acting, I thought, well, we're you're the big guns. You're the reason why you have a movie. You're the actors. Actors and actresses are actually only responsible for like 15% of an entire movie. Uh, so like the budget on things like this is production, post-production, editing, locations, all this stuff. And then when the actors come in, you're just there to read the lines. That's your and you go, well, aren't I the most important thing? Well, no, you're not. And in many ways, until the until there was like a star system developed, it didn't really matter who they had acting because people were just amazed that they were moving pictures. And then when the voices came and stuff, now with the when you got into the strikes and stuff like that, it was very difficult for actors to really have any say because they were a lot like cattle in a way. Like they, I, uh, when the Screen Actors Guild, when that stuff sort of came around, that came around at a very odd time because like from the conversations I've been listening to you having, you've learned that actors are owned by the studios. And like if you've ever seen John Wayne in where he played Gunga Din, like you got to know that he had no say in that whatsoever. Like the studio said, you're gonna do so many movies. We're gonna, and you're like, well, I don't want to do any movies. And you're like, well, you have to. You're under contract with us. Or sometimes a studio would buy you out and you wouldn't do any movies because you were only contracted to a certain studio, and other studios would want to use you.
When you said John Wayne, did you mean Genghis Khan?
Yeah, sorry, not Genghis
He's
Khan.
not,
Yeah,
he's not, there's a letter everyone can look up and find on the internet. It's actually pretty like gives you goosebumps to read, but it was him writing to Howard Hughes about because he had a deal with RKO Productions, that low kind of budget thing that
yeah. Well, RKO was originally that was Orson Welles.
yeah, Orson Welles tanked it though, and that's why Howard Hughes was able to buy it.
He
But
was well. It was see that was the thing. Orson Welles, War of the Worlds, Rose.
yeah.
So
But
anyway,
the letter, he signed up for 3 contracts, and he said on the final film that might have killed him, the Genghis Khan one, which led to his death because of the radiation poisoning that him and many other actors experienced on that set. But he wrote a little letter, and he said, "I think this is going to be my last film. I'm not feeling it. I don't feel involved in the script." And he just wrote a sincereful thing. He was really trying to get out of it. And everyone can look up the letter. It's on, I think it's Las Vegas Archives has it. But that he was generally just like, understand I'm under contract. I've done 2 movies with you guys so far. This is my last one to do. I just don't feel comfortable being involved in these scripts anymore. And then that's, obviously he filmed it, and then we know what happened afterwards. But I was just like, dang.
John Wayne was one of those. He was like an unsung hero of Hollywood in a way. If it wasn't for John Wayne was responsible for changing fight scenes in movies. Because if it wasn't for him, it would have happened eventually. But if it wasn't for him, uh, we would have had like if you saw any of the fight scenes from like the 40s and the 50s with these big haymakers being thrown that's not going anywhere near hitting the guy, and big falls and stuff where uh he brought in fighting to, like, if you're going to have a brawl in a tavern, he goes, this is how you do it. If you're going to hit someone with a chair, get a breakaway chair, do this kind of stuff. Don't, if you don't fake this stuff, he goes, uh, make it a bit more real. Now, but it was also like John Wayne. Do you ever heard why he walks the way he does?
Mm-mm.
John Wayne was, John Wayne was in, when you're filming, you have something called a mark. So you walk into a room and you have to hit your mark because that's what the camera is focused on. And back in those days, if you missed your mark by even like 2 inches, even an inch, you'd be out of focus. And they'd have to reshoot it, and everything was on film. So they had this, you would have an X on the ground where you had to stand. It was called your mark or your first. And he, John Wayne just could, because he's so tall and the way he walked, he just could not get it. So he developed a walk, and watch him when he does his movies. What he does when he walks in, he's looking down at his feet, he finds his mark, his head comes up, and that's how he starts his shot. And that became John Wayne. So watch him when he walks into any tavern, got his head down, he looks up, and he comes in and he looks up, and then he starts because he's got to hit his mark and he's got to come in, and he actually will do this sort of, I'm on my mark, there we go. And so he balances himself back, and he needed to develop that style because he was costing them so much money. He
That's
said,
crazy.
well, they just said you need to do this. But it was, so when you're talking about Walt Disney, the initial, he did the first voice of Mickey Mouse because nobody really cared about voice work. Nobody cared about, they were just amazed by moving pictures, like, like Al Jolson does the jazz singer, in that infamous movie, and it didn't really matter that the sound quality sucked and this sucked, and people just went wow. And so when you had a cartoon that had sound and the animation that had sound, people were like, this is crazy. So I went back and I went, but I thought, well, who did the voice of Sleeping Beauty? Who did the voice of the Prince? Who was the voice of the original Snow White or Pinocchio? And I thought, it didn't matter who they were. There was probably someone in the studio, or someone's grandmother, somebody that come in. They weren't actresses or actors. Uh, the very first time Walt Disney used a celebrity was that we would know was 1949, where Bing Crosby narrated Legend of Sleepy Hollow,
I didn't
the
know that.
original Legend of Sleepy. Yeah, so Bing Crosby, he does the, and there's Ichabod, crossing the bridge, and does that thing. The very first time they used a celebrity that we would kind of know of at the time, there was a gentleman by the name of Ed Wynn, and Ed Wynn was the standard. He was the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, and the Mad Hatter was basically characterized and based on Ed Wynn. And Ed Wynn was that actor who used to do this kind of, and he had this really funny voice, and you recognize him right away when in any Disney movie he's ever been in. And at the time, though, Ed Wynn was a very famous sort of comedian, comedy actor. He did lots of films and he always played sort of the same guy. So when he was in Alice in Wonderland as Mad Hatter, he would have been a big deal. And so I was looking into that going, why did it not matter that the voiceover artists who was in these? Because it was all about the animation. It was all about the story and the stuff that they were bringing in. And so the studios very rightly didn't really bring in anybody famous to because that would detract from the actual story that was going on. And that even filtered into things like here's a well you might know. Did you know the original James Bond? Uh the whole point of the Bond films was faraway locales and beautiful girls, and they were all like all the Bond girls. Most of the Bond girls did not speak English. They were models and actresses from the places where they were filming in the late early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. So Dr. No comes along and there's all these lovely, beautiful girls, and none of them speak any English. But that didn't matter. So, other than Moneypenny, every female voice is voiced by the same actress in all those films up until I think it was Goldfinger, or no, The Man with the Golden Gun. Her name is Nikki Van de Ziel. She was paid $25 a voice. She was not on in any of the credits. And she voices like in Dr. No, she voices six or seven different characters. She's the in Goldfinger, she's the girl who's painted gold. She's actually when Ursula Andress comes out at the beginning of the movie of Dr. No, they actually the directors when Alfred Broccoli said, "Do you sing?" And she went, "Well, yeah, I can." Nikki went, "Yeah, I can sing a little bit because um, we need we need somebody to be singing sort of some music as she walks out of the water. We've got the music. We just need a voice. Would you mind throwing that in?" She's like, "Yeah, that's fine." So she throws in a couple some, and so she did all these voices for the Bond films, and she doesn't get credited. And she made maybe $200 a film kind of thing when those first
Do
came
you
out.
think it's just because there was no room for voice acting? There wasn't really a category for it, so there's not a point in just being like, "Hey, let me ruin the film by showing you that we have these people." Like, look at Hell's Angels, for instance. When they reshot it with sound, the lead actress didn't fit the part anymore. They had to recast because the lead actress was hot on screen. She was a Scandinavian woman, I believe. And then they switched it over because her talking voice was not going to resonate with Americans, especially like at the time of McCarthyism and all
Well,
this was kind of hitting like this.
that was some of the reasons why they had to. A lot of it had to do with we're getting into another. You could do a whole other probably a whole other category on the body doubles in movies kind of thing, and how it wasn't until if it wasn't for the 60s and the 70s where we started to bring nudity and into films really. I mean, it was long enough, you've done the things where Macmillan and Wife was the very first TV show where they slept in the same bed together, because every other married couple in the 50s had twin beds.
Yeah.
And the foot on the floor thing you've mentioned before. And so the 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 voiceover work goes all the way back to things like My Fair Lady, where they replaced who was it? Was it Audrey Hepburn? Was it the My Fair Lady? Audrey Hepburn sang that entire movie, and up until they filmed the movie was released, she thought she was the voice of Eliza Doolittle, and they replaced her with Julie Andrews, and but they didn't tell her even though that she thought she was pretty good. She thought I can do this, and she worked her ass off to do this. They replaced her, Now, Julie Andrews is not credited in the movie as replacing her voice because the back then you were marketing your films on your who you're who's going to be in it kind of thing. So if you were doing any dubbing or anything like that, you did not let the public know that you were replacing their voice with anything, which was really weird. So it wasn't until the 70s when the term like dubbing sort of first started to come out, where people started to recognize, wait a second, there's other people doing the there's other people doing these voices.
It was wait, it was the 70s? Because what about like animes?
Oh, well, animes really didn't start getting dubbed until the 80s, really. Anime, because it was still considered a cartoon. Now that's a whole other thing that you could get into as well, because I'm even though I'm a voiceover artist, I can't listen to a dub. I don't, I can't stand them. I don't think they're, because to me, the the English diction doesn't fit what's going on in the screen. It just doesn't sound right. It just doesn't work. Um, and to me, it's over the top. It's always really big. Now, I've spoken to some people back in Japan who do this for a living, and they said, "What if I was to tell you that that's the reputation that anime actors also have? Like when Japanese people listen to Japanese or watch Japanese anime, 30% of them they go, oh, gee, that's really bad. So they think it's really bad, but then we get it over here in North America and we go, that's great because it's the original Japanese. So, but it's still it's still really big and over the top and the yeah, Japanese anime really hasn't it wasn't until the movie Akira came out that anime in particular came over here at all, where people saw the movie Akira, and that was in the early 80s, I think. And people went, wow, what is this adult cartoon thing? That's disgusting and gross and really cool. And then all of a sudden, Japanese anime started coming over. Uh, there was no one was syndicating Japanese anime. You couldn't tell it. And then a lot of my friends got into the dubbing portion of how you do that, and that's actually how they got into voiceover work. And a lot of this is the other thing that's in voiceover work in Hollywood. Almost all the voiceover work was done by radio people because they already had the equipment. And then they would just, and they also knew how to use it. So they would send you to a studio and go into the room, and you knew how to use a microphone. And sometimes you were turning your own switches and stuff on. Um, you would go in, you would do your stuff, and then you would go to work, or you would come off of work, or and then sometimes you would do some of your voiceover work from the radio station in a booth that nobody else was using. You would do stuff, and it wasn't until movie trailers came around that voiceover work became a thing, because before movie trailers used to just be it would be the guy who wasn't doing anything at in the newsroom. It would be, hey, there's a new show coming out. Do you want to pump it for they're like, yeah, okay, just a second. Hello. Uh, next up, we've got the Smiths, and then that would be it. There was nobody really doing it. And then it wasn't until In a World, where that guy comes along that all of a sudden people went, hey, this voiceover stuff. Because if you ever, man, we've all watched those, listen to the voiceovers from the 70s. That was somebody who was just handed some copy and told to speak. They weren't directed. The man or the woman, they're not directed. They're just put in a room, they're handed a piece of paper, and they're told to read it. And then they add the music after. And half the time, you can tell they've added the music after because the voice doesn't fit what they've got. Like you listen to the old
Well, it became a trope of like if you're dubbing Japanese movies and all those kung fu movies, the voices do not match what the person is saying at all.
Oh God, yes. I mean, one of the funniest Saturday Night Live episodes I ever saw was they did it was with the original cast with Bill Murray and John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, and Steve Martin was there, and they did a sketch that was in Greek, uh, it was a Greek film that had been dubbed into English, but they were doing it live. So they they had they had people standing off camera uh, doing the script, reading, and the people on stage were just going, and then people would stop talking, but everyone's mouths were still moving, kind of thing. It was one of the funniest things I ever saw because they picked up on it right away, and that was the thing about the original dubbing. When the original dubbing didn't care about, and with same with anime, it was really hard to fit in the words from a different language to fit the mouths movements and things. And it wasn't until what's happening now, and we'll go back to this later, but one of the arguments that's happening now is, which I didn't realize what was happening, is you take a Japanese anime and it has to be translated into English. But what's been happening is the people who are doing the translating aren't doing faithful translations. They're doing whatever they want to fit the script. So sometimes there's some cartoons that you will get or some anime you will get where the scripts aren't even close to what the original was. And you'll have people back in Japan going, well, that's, or the actually for a lot of the people back in Japan, they never hear it or they never see it because they don't care. Whereas over here, you'll be the only way you would see it is if you go to the subtitle. Now, this is where it gets into something. You'll see the subtitles for a Japanese anime you're watching, and then you'll watch the dub version, and the dub version is totally different. And you'll go, what? And so that's recently a lot of script writers and translators have been fired. I don't know if you've heard like Crunchyroll, I think was a big one, where they took them basically they took them to task because people were changing the actual scripts to put in political narratives, and a large chunk of translators got fired for that. And so that affects the voiceover work as well, because sometimes you don't realize that the scripture you're being handed isn't the actual thing that what people were doing. So voiceover work in Hollywood it's been a rough road in a way. It's always been there, but it's sort of like it is like the body double stuff where sometimes it didn't want to be recognized. Like there's that famous like Julia Roberts, the poster for Pretty Woman. Uh that's not her. That's her head. That's not her body. Um, but the person who did that isn't credited. There's a couple other scenes that woman is in, and a couple movies she was in, and she actually, I think she wrote a book called Body Double, I think later. Um, but voiceover work was a lot like that for a while, and it wasn't until well, there's the '70s. See, the '70s and Disney started to use some celebrities. Like if you ever saw Robin Hood with the foxes and the bears and all that kind of stuff, there was they used a lot of like country country singers, and at that point Sebastian Cabot, who was a quite a big actor. Sebastian Cabot he was the Winnie the Pooh narrator. um Welcome to
He's
the
still
100.
alive.
He might be the but he was the guy. He Sebastian Cabot was the Welcome to the 100 Acre Woods. He used to do that. There was the Yeah, just saying that like that's where in the '70s, so they started bringing in more uh bigger names, but still, even then, people weren't really going to. You wouldn't go see Robin Hood because you knew that uh there were some famous people in it. You went to saw Robin Hood because it was a Disney film. I think the first Disney film that was really marketed as of we've got an actual singer was The Little Mermaid, where uh they went, yeah, we're gonna really pump this. And I'd never heard of the singer before, but it was the very first time that they went, we're gonna get someone who actually like sings to be in our musical. Isn't How awesome is that? And you're like, okay, that's fine. And
I
then
was
and you Go ahead. Yeah.
I was trying to look up this one thing because there's a movie out there that doesn't seem like it looks like it was definitely dubbed over, but then I started looking into it. I think it might have been a parody movie. Do you remember Kung Pao? You
Yes.
know what I'm talking about, right? That movie does not seem real. I was just trying to look it up to pull up a scene, the My Name is Betty part, because none of the stuff that I remember matched what he was saying. I mean, let me play it real quick and then we'll see if anything, I'll just edit it out. But that movie just did not seem real at all, but yet we still have this like, hold on, because it's an American. I'm pretty sure it's a parody movie if I'm not mistaken, or it might be just dubbed over. But
Is
let
it?
me.
Yeah. Is it Kung Pao? Or is it the one where the?
He fights the cow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is Kung Pao.
Yeah.
Let's see
I'm
if I
pretty
can.
sure. I'm pretty sure they did that whole the fake dubbing technique kind of thing. But you had what somebody was just saying recently. Oh, what movie was it? See, back in the time, they used to call dubbing revoicing. Have you ever watched?
It's a real movie right there. What I just showed you. I
Yeah,
don't know if they took it from Japan and then they just dubbed it in a funny way and turned it into a parody movie. Because
I think that's what they did because they're What's New Tiger Lily with Woody Allen does the same thing where it's a big martial art movie because I remember there's a big scene where there's a big fight scene on a boat and the you have guys going, look at me, I'm hanging from the ceiling, I'm pretending I'm a snake, but that's not what he was saying, kind of thing. He's saying all this really, and the yeah, I think it's called What's New Tiger Lily, where there was a time where you took like I think who are the guys, Mad movies, I think where they do that, well they take
But does that discern the art though? Like as a voiceover actor, for instance, if you go on YouTube right now, you can go and find multiple animes that are already dubbed over in English versions, but then people decide I'm going to take a crack at it because I'm a fan and I can probably make a funnier version. And they do that with Dragon Ball Z. The abridged versions are always 100% better than any of the English or because the guys who do it, they don't sound exactly like the characters,
no, they
but they
don't. That's
just make it more funny where it's like it's not dark outside and he's like wait is that night no god damn it and then he just runs out the and it's just like none of the animes originally said that there was a more heroic thing to it but they just gave it like a more generational thing where it's now like in this today's day and age even though the cartoons aren't really that old but it gives it more of like of how they would talk normally if they were people. It's kind of like The Boys, that
yeah, I
superhero
think
show.
yeah, exactly. The where what you come across is sort of what I touched before, where a lot of times with the animes, the only directions that they were given, the guys in the studio when they were doing the dubbing, the guys and the girls, were they were told, this is the script, you need to match the mouth movements. So it didn't matter what you were saying. And sometimes it didn't even matter if it made sense. You just had to match the mouth movements, which is why you would hear some guys go, this is me coming at you like this. Ha ha. And the director would go, cut, thank you. Okay, awesome. Move on. And you go, that that isn't I should say it better. And they're like, no, no, that's perfect. That's the script, that's the line, that fits, but it doesn't make sense. Well, yeah, it does. It's you said what's in the script, so there you go. And they would just move on. And so what they've done with anime these days, and it has AI has helped a little bit, but um, is they've allowed the people of if you can take anything you want and make it fit what it is, you can make some funny stuff. You can make some really funny stuff. But if you're trying to fit the original scripts that you were given from the translation, because sometimes languages don't transfer over that way. Sometimes we know that. I mean, there's certain things that you can say in another language that would take a paragraph in English to say, or in other, and vice versa. So, the how does that feel from a voiceover standpoint? I don't know. I mean, I've heard people say I know the guy who's recently doing,
Your mic's to your right, just making sure.
yeah,
There
yeah,
you go.
the
Thank you.
guy who's, yeah, the guy who's doing,
Sounded like you were talking down a hallway for a minute. It's a good voice effect.
yeah, yeah, just the guy, the movie, the Level Up Zero, I think, or Zero, is it called
Who's in it?
Solo Leveling, Solo Leveling. I just watched an interview with a guy who's he's doing the dubbed version of Solo Leveling, and he's already getting grief from from people going, because I guess the guy has a catchphrase. He says "arise" or something like this. I don't know what he does, and something like that. And the he's already saying, you better say it exactly how they say it in the anime. Don't you screw that up and all that. And there's other people who are saying, no, no, I like the way he does it. But this guy said something really funny. He goes, and to all you haters out there, you know that line "arise"? He goes, well, guess what? Next time you watch the show, if you keep hating on me, I'm going to say, get up. I'm going to say, awaken. I'm going to say, get yourself out of bed. I don't have to say the way they anime because I'm the voice. So I can do whatever I want. And I
Well,
thought,
well, how come
that's
you
very
never
true.
did radio?
I just never started in radio. See, a lot of people who are in voiceover work now used to be in radio in the 80s, and they did a transition over into voiceover work very easily uh, until around, I'd say 2010, where it didn't, where home studios started to come in and people started doing voiceover work on their own and realizing that I don't need to have any radio training or anything like that. What they realized, or pardon me, what they realized was they actually needed acting training to do proper voice work because radio guys were, we all had that, you had a lot of radio guys coming in who were, there's the AM radio guys who are like, good morning, welcome to
You're listening to 93.5.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Except, weather out there today. And then you had the FM guys who are like, hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome to,
I don't know. That sounds like a blues station. You're listening to the best of smooth
But that was
jazz.
the thing. Welcome to Adult Light. Thank you very much. And so um, a lot of people that I know who do, like, for example, like movie trailers and stuff like that, have come over from radio. But I also know a lot of people who are quite professionals in this job who just started as voiceover people. They got the stuff and they trained themselves how to do it. And they went to because it was, around 2010, you could actually go get a class in school to do that. And that took Hollywood a long time to realize that even I don't even think even Hollywood, what was it? Like Pixar and Toy Story, where people started going, where they started marketing films on famous people rather than the animation itself. Now, Toy Story, in a way, is almost it's like a miracle thing all happening because good animation, good story, great, um, great works all around. Like the entire, good marketing, everything about Toy Story just worked. Like the characters inside were they all worked really well together. They sounded good together. They sounded like they had fun. And there were other movies that marketed. Do you remember any of the movies that people got really big on, like ants for a while? Ants and bugs and grasshoppers and all that kind of stuff. And Madonna was in one, and I think the guy from Talk Radio was in one, and
Well, it's the
the
horror genre that really sparked it up with like
well,
Arachnid and all those other movies that came out with creepy crawlies that were like 50 times bigger
yes.
than they were supposed to be.
Well, but so what do? They do kid shows about like A Bug's Life, you
Yep.
know? It's all that kind of stuff where you're like, oh, and then they change that to shrink them down and put kids in the garden, and then you're back to the giant bugs again, to the giant spiders and birds and whatever.
But you
And
mentioned radio people getting into voiceover work, but if you went from acting work and you chose voiceover work, why didn't you just think about taking the other step, which is radio, which is a different one, but then you get more time to talk, and it seems like, or maybe you just didn't want that.
I actually myself, I didn't want that. Just I was watching an interview actually this morning with Mark Elliott, who did all the Disney movies for from 1977 up until 2001. And he is in a very interesting point where people listen to him and they go, are you a singer or something like that? And he goes, no. And they go, I've heard your voice before. And he goes, well, maybe you've Walt Disney presents The Lion King, and they go, oh my God. they reckon his voice just gives you shivers because he was the voice of Disney for all these years. And he started from radio, and he talked about all the different radio stations he worked at. And I thought about that, and I thought about all my friends who were radio people who are now voiceover people, and they all worked at least 4 or 5 different radio stations in different cities because that's what you did. You moved around from radio to radio. The radio name that you had when you were on air was never your real name,
Yeah.
and it was usually given to you by the station. In fact, one guy was given a name because they already had the jingle, but the guy didn't work out.
Yeah, like my dad's not his real name's not his radio name. Is the name I've been calling him since for the past 26 years has been Skip Dixon. That's my
Yeah,
dad's radio
exactly.
name. It's not his real name
Yeah,
though.
no, and that had
It
nothing
became
to
his
do.
personality though. That was how everyone knows him. I think he just recently changed his name to his actual name on Facebook. It's been the other thing for the longest time.
See, how cool is that? And you just the that had nothing to do with hiding your privacy or anything like that. It was just
It
most
would
people's names
that's
just
how
don't
people
sound.
knew him. I mean, that's the thing. That's like why I like Coast to Coast AM so much was is like especially the Art Bell programs. Not so much George Norrie. Like it's interesting now, but it's like it's not as good as it was back in the day. You got to think at a time when there was nothing on really the radio. There was a couple of things, couple of stations people would listen to, and I was too young for this, and I wasn't even born yet. But then you're just driving at like 1 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the desert somewhere, going doing a road trucking job. And there was someone, Art Bell, who was just coming on the radio channels like, "Hello, everybody. Are you ready for a mysterious night?" And he would just kind of, if you listen to those old programs, and then just invite a random person that would call on and start explaining their being kidnapped by aliens and probed and all this type of stuff. And you're just driving in your car listening to her. I was like, that's what I was interested in. And listening, I listened to some of those old programs from their vault that they have. And it's kind of like where I like to talk to guests about some of these types of stuff too. But it was not necessarily about being a personality on the radio, but just there's a lot of people out there doing something. And like for you, your work, for instance, voiceover work, there's a lot of people that love a certain thing that you might have narrated or have might have voiced in or in something on X Files where like that's a great narration or something. And that's they listen to that probably religiously. Some people do. And you don't even know the impact you're making by just talking. I mean, I know so many people that have Dragon Ball Z tattoos. My brother does, all from an anime, but specifically the English dubbed version, where that's what they grew up on. It resonated with them. And it resonated with a whole bunch of kids. I mean, cartoons. What would we do without voices for cartoons?
That's the thing. Cartoons were the again, cartoons in the 60s and 70s hadn't really like when you're talking about you had Mel the we all have our heroes like Mel Blanc for who did all the voices, Man of a Thousand Voices. He did all the voices for Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner.
Yeah.
He's Tweety, Sylvester, and all these voices. Now there was a woman who used to do some voice. She was like there was a little old lady who used to show up. It was often like I think it was like Tweety's owner. Um, this little old lady who used to show up. So there was a woman who did voices with Mel, but for the most part, Mel did all the voices. Some of them sounded close to the same, but Blacklock, Sherlock, and all these, but Foghorn Leghorn, all his characters he did, um, and he, you know, big hero of mine. And then you had the guys from when they did like the Flintstones and all the, and Hanna Barbera, and when they did all these kind of things, uh, and in a way, though, cartoons were still for kids. Uh, so that's kind of how they were treated in a way. Um, and you had some like Casey Kasem did a lot of voices for cartoons. He was the voice of he was the voice of Shaggy from Scooby Doo as well. And so you did have
I
voiceover
feel like
people who
any
would
kid going through puberty can do Shaggy.
well exactly Brett, and and even Scooby Doo, like the stuff they used to get away with Scooby Doo, like they were always hungry. They show up in they're when they're eating Scooby snacks. They treat them like cookies. It's dog biscuits.
Yeah.
The two of them are eating dog biscuits because they're always hungry
Well,
because
Shaggy was
there's
like the stoner that never mentioned he was a stoner. Anytime he was like, I gotta go get something, man." That's like usually when people are like, "I gotta go smoke something," but he was like, "No, I'm gonna make a sandwich," and the sandwich was like reference to a bong or a pipe or
oh
something you'd be smoking.
always he was always off. I gotta do my thing. I'll
Yeah,
be right back.
yeah. He was always leaving the group
Reggie.
for 5 minutes and come right back.
Exactly. And then you had the Jetsons and all that stuff, and they
Well, do you think the animation led to some of these people's careers, like all these people that made sound effects and voice, or do you attribute it? I mean, people can make, look, I'm not saying these people are not talented. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that sometimes it's the impact of the animation. There's plenty of animations out there that have plenty of good voiceover actors in there that can do a wide range of voices, but they don't get the top voice actor name, not just on their limitation of voices. It's because the anime didn't take off.
very much so. And a lot of these guys and girls moved on to just different cartoons. Like, do you remember Space Ghost? You probably don't remember. There were some of these cartoons, and the 80s got really big on like we're gonna market this with toys. So we need like Micronauts need to be marketed with toys, and there was Thundercats, and there was um He-Man, and Masters of the Universe, that whole thing, and there was this whole kind of really kind of weird, over the top, uh sort of everything was going to be fantasy realms, but the whole point was we're going to be selling toys to kids. That's why we're doing this cartoon. Transformers, all the Transformer stuff, and I know a lot of those guys who did, like Transformers and Beast Wars and all that kind of stuff, and they talk about the way that they, did it back then. When I did Hot Wheels Acceleracers, um, and Acceleracers, sadly, we did the fifth out of a six. I think it was the no the there was going to be one more movie that never got done. So there was a lot of cliffhangers in our movie that never got solved. And I still get emails from people today going, "Hey man, what happens in the next?" And I go, "I don't know."
Wait, you were
It's
in
like
Hot Wheels?
there was a show called Hot Wheels Acceleracers, and
Like the toy brand Hot Wheels.
yeah, yeah,
You were on an
they did
episode or you did a bunch of episodes?
no, they did. This is in the late '80s, early '90s. Hot Wheels came out with a whole new marketing thing. It was called Hot Wheels Acceleracers, and it was a digital. It was like the animation they used for Reboot. The animation they used for it was all computer CG. So there was no. Yeah, there was no. It wasn't like Transformers where you could tell that was sort of drawn still. This was all CG, and it was driving through different like multiverses in a way, which was really cool. It was really, really cool. They had but there was going to be new drivers, new tracks, new this were coming out, and I think, yeah, that you can still get toys
Wait,
for
was one
it.
of them a giant blue van?
Yep.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, that would have been
It was marketed very well because every McDonald's Happy Meal thing had a Accelerator Hot Wheels car that I used to get and try and collect them all. And one was a green
yeah,
car.
yeah, there was a green
Yeah.
car. There was the van was
You were in that? What were you playing?
I played there was a robot in it called Gig.
Holy shit, hang
And
on a second. I gotta look this up. I'm sorry. I might have to get you to give me an autograph.
and that was when Gig was the and that's one of the funniest I've got. There's a couple.
That's you?
That's what the little robot with
Yeah.
the yeah, I was Gig. And
Oh my
they
God. I need to get your autograph. Hang on a second.
there you go. I can send it to you.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah, the funny thing about that was Gig wasn't actually that big a character when it first started because there was going to be six movies, and the one we did, I did 4 and 5, and uh, I get called in by my agent, and she says there's going to be this audition for this robot, and I went, and this was my first ever voiceover audition. I'd never done any
Were
voiceover
you
work at
nervous?
all. I was very nervous.
Were you like,
So
should I do Stephen Hawking or something like that? Like,
oh, I did. I went.
I want to go to the island.
There was, or and I looked up R2D2 beeps. I was like, do I do C3PO? Do they want HAL 9000 from? I'm sorry, Dave, that won't work. Do I do that guy? I was like, what do I do? What do I do?
Do they want Robin Williams, an autonomous man?
Well, and I was going, danger, Will Robinson, danger, and I was doing everything, and the finally I was like, I don't know. So I walk in there and I'm all like, okay, here we go. And there's two guys sitting there, producer and a director. And the director goes, okay, you're here reading for gig. And I said, yes. And they said, do you know the show Gilligan's Island? And I said, yes. And they said, do you know Thurston Howell the Third? And I went, Thurston Howell the Third, what? Jim Backus, the guy who does the voice of Mr. Magoo? And they went, yes. And I went, and I went, uh, yeah. They said, can you do Thurston Howell the Third? And I went, badly, I think, maybe. I don't know. So they go, that's perfect. Go ahead. And so they hand me the script. And so I do a like Gilligan, Yeah, I was like, okay, racers, here we go. Time. And I did this really, really
That's
bad,
pretty good.
and
Sound like you should
they're
have a
laughing.
pipe and
Well,
a
they're laughing. Yeah, they're laughing their head off. They're peeing themselves laughing. And I don't know if it's because I'm doing a good job or a really, really bad job. And they said, okay, now we're going to play something for you. And I went, all right. And they played the script twice. And they said, okay, which one was you? And I went, what? I go, can I hear it again? And they played it again. And I said, I'm the second one. And they said, actually, you're the first one. This is you. This second one is this idiot over here. And the director points to the producer and he goes, when we did the very first time gig was on, he had 3 lines. He had 3 lines. And this idiot decided to do a very bad Thurston Howell the Third impression for the character. And now Gig is going to be a much bigger character. He's got way more lines. So we need somebody who can copy his voice,
finish it. Yeah.
who finish it. And he goes, and as you can tell, that's you. And he goes, so I got the
That's
job.
awesome.
I got the job not because I was prepared, I was good at my job, because I could do a shitty Thurston Howell the Third.
Dude, it sounded pretty good.
But that even then, you kind of go, I walked out of that room and it totally changed the way I look at the business, and it changed the way that I auditioned, to the point where I used to have people who were really, they would go, I don't like auditioning with you. And I said, why is that? And they go, because I'm nervous and you're not. And I said, well, I just learned there's nothing to be nervous about. Sometimes there is. Sometimes if you're going to walk into the room and meet Steven Spielberg or something, there's something to be
Fuck
nervous
Steven
about.
Spielberg.
Yeah, but
No,
it's
wait, no,
but
no, no,
it's
I'm sorry. Stephen King. Sorry.
no,
Sorry.
but yeah, but
Get
it's
those
it's
guys
those
mixed
type of
up.
things. It's those type of things where I went, I just learned that it sometimes it doesn't matter, because you're going to walk into that room and you could be throwing a red herring, you're throwing something.
Well, I think it's a good way to look at it, especially if you kind of are nervous to go into something, they're going to choose what voice they appreciate the most. Like it just resonates with them the most. Sometimes you could have the best voice in the world, and for some people, don't like Morgan Freeman's voice. It's just not
It's a
resonating to
yeah,
them.
it's the whole thing about, like, when I first started acting, one of the things they tell you when you're in acting school is that sometimes you don't get the part because you remind somebody of someone's ex-husband, or a girl walks in the room and the casting director sees you wearing shoes that she likes and doesn't like you very much. You don't know why you're not going to get something. Maybe you walk in the room and you're not going to get it because the part's already been cast, but you're not told that when you walk in the room. They're just pretending to go through the auditions, but they've actually cast it to someone's brother back. And so
Why don't
there's
they just
lots,
say that then? Why are you wasting everybody's time?
because of unions. They have to fulfill a quota, yet they have to see a certain amount of union actors.
Oh, okay.
And so if a part is cast already, it is wasting people's time. It's totally wasting his time. It's wasting everybody's time. And it's one of the things that unions actually got into trouble for a while, where they were like, "Look, I know there's a quota, and I know you have to see a certain amount of us, but if the part's been cast already, why do we have to go through this charade of you need to see 25 more of my people?" Well, no, we found the person we want. So why do we have to keep doing this?
Well, how has
Uh,
the industry changed since you first started to where it's at now? I mean, we've talked about like the woke stuff in the past, which honestly, if you look at like any animes out there that play certain individual characters, a lot of them are white, but it's just, I don't know if people don't really look that far into it. You know, the woke stuff kind of gets canceled out with the voiceover stuff, but then there's like Hank, uh, was it Azari? Hank, the guy, yeah, I mean, he did a really good job playing that role of a pill, and I don't think it meant people can take it as racist or not, but it was just a person that got put in a position. They have to act like who this person is, but it was a different time.
I've been in that situation a couple times here in the UK where what's happened is I would have thought when I came over here, like I can do accents. I do accents pretty well. I'm sort of a joker in a way, and I thought I would have to be brushing up on my Scottish and my Welsh and my this and my RP. And what's happened for the most part is they said, well, actually, we need to hire a native Scottish person, whether you do the accent very well or not. Because if somebody finds out you're not Scottish, we'll get into trouble. Whereas before, that didn't matter. That isn't the whole the and this has sort of bled over into Hollywood as well, where you've had how many like you've seen some like Daniel Day-Lewis doing some amazing roles. Or you look at the last Batman movie where the Penguin. Um, uh, oh, who the heck was that?
Oh, Colin Farrell?
Yeah, I mean, Colin Farrell is very Irish. He's not American. He's
Yeah.
not anything like that. And so these are all character actors who specialize in doing different things. I mean, Hollywood right now is being ruled by Australians.
Yeah.
Like the amount of Australians do very, very good American accents. Very good American accents. And that's great. And the reason why Australians were ruling the roost for a while is because word was that they got tired of seeing the same people uh, showing up for all the jobs, in nepotism can only go so far, and they needed new blood. So they reached out overseas to grab some Australian actors, and they said, "Hey, can you do stuff?" I mean, you look at House is actually kind of a bad example, Hugh Laurie, because the amount of people that turned down the role of House was quite insane. The amount of people they asked George Clooney, they asked uh, who is
That's
there's some
crazy that they would ask those
they,
guys because that's
well
like
they asked like 9 or 10 different big name
big.
actors to
Yeah.
say,
See, why would they do that? None of those actors going to risk their career on a show.
well, no, that was the thing. I mean, and Hugh Laurie at the time was a very big actor as well. But what was happening was they were asking these guys to play House, and nobody liked the character. They said he's not a likable person. I don't want to play House. The show itself was based on the fact that he's not a likable character.
Yeah.
It was based on the fact, well, the show is based on Sherlock Holmes. That's why they call him House. I mean, that's the basis of the whole thing. And Sherlock Holmes was a dick as well. Like, he wasn't a nice guy. He was addicted to drugs. He had his things. And so when Hugh Laurie stepped in, one of the apocryphal stories they have about, which means that you take it with a grain of salt, is they were looking for House still, and House's agent, he was in Madagascar filming Flight of the something or other kind of thing, where about a plane that crash lands in the desert. Um, and they said, "Can you put together this audition for House?" And so he's standing in his bathroom in Madagascar with his camera going, and he's doing it. He sends the film off to the producers, and one of the producers gets a hold of it and goes, "Now, see, this is who I'm looking for. A real American. Where's this guy? Why haven't we seen this guy?" And somebody went, "A real American?" He goes, "Yeah, that's the guy I want." And somebody went, "Should we tell him?" "No, don't tell him." So tell him because so just bring in the real American. And so they brought him in, and in fact, most people that worked on set, it's sort of like Bridget Jones' Diary. Bridget Jones' Diary, where you have what's her name now? I can't remember.
Wait, before we start going into movies, I got to ask about what's the worst thing to your industry as a voiceover, personally, that you fear? Do you fear AI or do you fear anything else?
AI is one of those wonderful things that the worst thing in the industry right now is actually sort of one of the worst things that's happening with actors is uh them not being able to you not being able to do what you did before for no particular reason other than you're not there's been a lot more like I got a voiceover read the other day and it came in strictly it said must be read by Asian American, must be read by,
Then why are they sending it to you if they know you're not Asian American?
because I get American voice, but so I get this, and so so I read it and I go, well, and so what happens is somebody there has went, well, here's an English script. I'll just send it, an American script. I'll send it to Casper, and I get it, and I read it, and I go, I can't read this, and they go, why not? And they go, well, didn't you read the fine print? And they went, oh shit, okay, sorry, and that's happened a little bit. I actually believe that AI is a fantastic tool. I use AI in my work all the time when I'm doing my editing, breaking down, like, getting rid of some noises and pops and clicks and all that. A friend of mine just used AI to voice a book that she wrote, and she wants to write a sequel. And so what she did was she took her first book and she fed it into an AI generator, and the AI made all the characters talk to her. And so she said for her as a writer, this was an amazing tool because the characters are kind of talking to her. I listened to it for 30 seconds and I went, uh, I didn't like it at all because I could tell the voices were AI. Whereas, but she couldn't, she didn't care. Uh, so am I worried that AI is going to come along and take some of my jobs? About the same that I was worried what happened during COVID when all of a sudden everybody decided they wanted to go into voice work, and there was thousands and thousands of new.
Well, that's like podcasts started up. I mean, the voice has really amplified literally to a different platform now or a different level because of everyone. I think it was a little bit before the pandemic actually happened, but there were a lot of advertisements for selling home studios, and this is when kind of podcasting first kind of became pretty well known by Joe Rogan and plenty of other names that started kind of coming onto the scene. Now they've had podcasts longer than when it really took off. But the whole being stuck inside your home thing really amplified people to start their own music studios. They were really every single ad was an Amazon studio or something that you can build up your own thing. Musicians started up during the pandemic. Podcasters did, and then it wasn't until 3 months after we opened up, everything kind of got relieved and everyone was kind of out of this shelter for however long. Um, Podcasts went from, I think there was a total of 3.3 million podcasts out there, dropped off to probably now, which would be a safe conservative estimate, would be around 250,000 to 275,000 podcasts. I mean, that is still a lot of content.
That is still a lot of content, but what it is it's I liken it to the wheat and chaff kind of thing when you had a lot of people thinking. Now there was a lot of people out there who thought that I'm going to make money doing this, and podcasting or influencing. Influencers are still there, like the TikTok influencers and all this stuff. Like you were talking about, um, when COVID came around. I mean, Billie Eilish's first album was done in her bedroom during COVID, kind of thing. Like, and So if it wasn't for like, and there's some artists, there's one guy, his voice is just awesome. Livingston, you heard his stuff? Just type his name into into YouTube. It's like he's got some song out called Sticks and Stones or something, or Last Man Standing or something. I don't know. But his voice is just like wow. His it's just in there's a lot of people now. Here's my thing. People have always had something to say and they've always had opinions. But now we now have opportunities to share your opinions with more than two people. You get on a social media platform like TikTok or something, or get yourself a podcast. And if you're somebody who's good with words, all of a sudden you're swinging people over to your opinion, whether it's right or not. You might not have done any research whatsoever, but if you talk up a good storm, people go, well,
I've
what
been
you're
at
saying
fault for
must,
doing that a couple times myself.
but
Um,
but it's, I mean,
Well, podcasts
your
are a
thing is,
dying form. It's not it's I don't picture it being really necessarily open as much as it was when it really kind of first started taking off. I believe there's a couple names that capitalized on it, but what it did kind of show to me was that, and I think we had seen this before podcasts really bursted onto the scene, which was we went from getting our news to from news actual anchors, people who you thought had journalistic degrees, to then taking our news, which we do still in this form, from comedians like the Colbert Show and all these. They turned their whole set and host stage from like the Tonight Show of interviewing celebrities to literally just dressing up in a suit, having a giant thing of the globe behind them. It says like in the weird blue and red lettering news or something. And then they start cracking jokes based on certain political events. And you could, I guarantee to you right now, you can look at any TV show host, any news anchor of those comedical shows or anything. Who's Jimmy Dore's political side? You can look at him and say Democrat. You can look at someone and say Republican. You can look at them and say conservative because they've learned how to now that's their brand. And now people don't want to watch the news. They want to watch the news and have it be funny. So let me turn on Jimmy Stewart. Let me turn on Jimmy Fallon. Let me turn on whoever. And that's how they want to accept their thing. And then now podcasters like to talk about certain political events. People base shows. I would do that if I didn't have this show. I would love to do a show where I just ranted into a microphone about all the bullshit in the world. But
yeah, you get
it
the
could
guys like Chris
resonate.
Williamson. Yeah, you get guys like Chris Williamson and Jordan Peterson and who like Jordan Peterson is a very
He's
like
not
that.
that smart. I don't know why
Well,
people keep saying
he's
he's a
no, well, no,
genius.
no, no. He uses very large words,
Yeah.
and he's also very good at he's he will conflux you kind of thing. Like he just all he needs to do is use a couple words and then there's other people like, have you seen the critical thing? I think he's called the critical thinker, where he was that teacher who they asked him a question about J.K. Rowling, about how J.K. Rowling is upset about a bunch of people because of transphobia and all this. And the teacher went, whoa, okay, let's back this up. And let's look at this issue. Let's do this a critical thought experiment. And they did it as a thought. And basically, the teacher didn't talk the students out of what they believed. What the teacher did was showed them that what they believed was a fallacy because of they came at it with false information. That's all he did. He wasn't trying to change the student's mind or anything like that. And the amount of flack this teacher got for defending J.K. Rowling was like, he was like, what? No, he goes, and it was, and he didn't see this happening at all. You'll have to, he's some history teacher. He's a young guy. Probably he's in his mid 20s, longer, and you'll see him but you have people with platforms now on like podcasts, and you have I've noticed a lot of actors, out of work actors,
Yeah.
are doing the podcast thing now. Like,
Well, it became a way to be like a voice. Like I said, radio. It's now
eh,
everyone can be their own radio
what?
personality and
Do you
people listen
remember?
to it.
Do you remember the time? I think the original podcasts were shock jocks. Howard Stern. These were the original.
Well, those are
podcasters. They
people that had their own actual radio show that they did independently, like the was it Anthony and Opie.
and they were these are the guys who, when digital radio first came out, who went, where you needed subscriptions and stuff, where you had shock jocks like Howard Jones, who was on actual radio,
Howard Stern.
and yeah, pardon me, yeah, Howard Jones with his. I don't think Howard Stern and Howard Jones are even close
No, no,
together,
no.
but
Howard Stern's
so
an
Howard,
asshole.
yeah, so you got Howard Stern, who basically gets was but there was that whole era of like the shock jock, the late night shock jock, phone into my show and I'll be a dick to you, blah blah blah. And then he gets booted off and he goes into digital radio, and where he can say whatever he wants because it's subscription, and you can swear and you can do whatever you want and you can talk about pornography and do whatever you want. And now with podcasts, you can kind of do the same. And then you have somebody like Joe Rogan who kind of saw what happened where he gets picked up by Spotify, and then Spotify says, but you can't do that. And you can't say that. And he's like, why? This is my thing. And they're like, well, because you're with us now.
Well, actually, Spotify's been pretty good with him. It was YouTube that had the problem with him. But then his 4-year contract for Spotify just ended. So now he's back on YouTube. And there are some episodes that YouTube just won't allow to go up there. But overall, like I think people kind of forget, like there was that radio vibe everybody kind of has in the beginning and it kind of drifts off. I had it, if you look back at the beginning of my show, it was very kind of like, how do I try and insert my own opinions and at the same time trying to seem balanced, and you're just trying to find out who you really are, and then you just stop worrying so much about it. By the 1600 episode, I was just like, what the fuck am I? Let's just talk, you know? But the radio thing, like to me, is interesting because my mom still does radio. My dad does it a little bit on a country station. But my mom she owes a morning show. My dad, when he does his radio, how he's always done it, he had a morning maybe hour, but then it was a lot of it was music stuff. Like his whole thing that everyone loved him for was no commercial shit. My dad was like, let's just get to the music. Kiss, first thing, as soon as you turn on your car radio, should be the first thing you're listening to. And that's how he did it. And people love that. Like, oh my God, the one time I can drive in my car for an hour and actually listen to music, music, music. Now, my mom's got a radio show, so she's constantly booking guests, asking me how I'm getting guests. Could you get me this guest? Could you get me that guest? Or, hey, how about you? How about we do a guest trade? And I'm like, who you got to offer? She's like, I got Bill Murray from, oh, not Bill Murray. I got Murr from Impractical Jokers. I'm like, I'm good. And it's just not my style. I'm not interested. And but she's like, we'll bounce like things back and forth. But she does an actual radio morning show where they interview guest celebrities and politicians and local business people. And then they goes to her own music thing, which she's then doing, playing music and doing things of that sort. It's an interesting form. I don't know how much longer it's going to be around. I know people say, well, every radio will always be around. Yes, radio will always be around, but the number of stations may not be what it was in the beginning. We've seen it dropped off. I've watched my parents work at radio stations that have closed down because they just weren't getting good business on things. Corporations get bought up, and eventually we'll have this channel still, but most of the things now are listening devices in cars. For instance, when Barbenheimer really kicked up, that was an event to save the cinema industry because the cinema industry was badly hurt after being shut down for so long. And people realized that they can stream from home. It's cheaper. You pay a certain amount of money per month. And people just didn't feel like going back to the theater. But the number of people that started doing it because they wanted the experience. But at the same time, it's much easier to sit at home and watch Netflix and watch a whole wide list of things on any streaming devices you have. That has ruined the cinema industry, where I don't think we're going to have necessarily, oh, there's a movie theater on every block. It's not going to be like that anymore. It's going to be certain locations, certain times of the day, and then they close. You know, certain events, maybe certain seasons. But it's the changing evolution of our culture. Sadly, the mediums, like I love podcasting and all that, but it's complicated as much as probably voice acting is complicated. When it changes to new forms, you get nervous and then you adjust to the nervousness and then it doesn't become new anymore.
That's a that is a very good point, good sir. The before I like when I got into voice work, I used to go down to the studios and go into, the recording studio and say, hi to the gang and play with the toys, and they'd hand me my script and I would do my thing. And then COVID comes along and all of a sudden they're asking me to do this stuff from home. And It scared the shit out of me, and it still kind of does sometimes because I'm not an audio engineer, and some of the stuff that they were asking me to do, like we need to connect to a studio in LA. I don't know how to do that, kind of thing. At the time, where you were getting into like when they were talking in like patching phone patches and stuff, and ISDN this and that, and they were getting into they need to. I said, can't I just record it here and send it to them? And they said, no, we're going to do this session live. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on, and it still kind of does that to me in a way. I see some of that happening with as you were changing. It's the same thing you were talking about, like with the movie theaters changing. Like the things got so expensive in movie theaters, people just weren't going in there anymore, and things were getting so expensive for the, even like what I was doing. I was like, what am I going to do? And then COVID kind of hit, and they had to force the price down of certain things. It made things like podcasting and home studios easier to do. I still don't like it as much. I don't mind working from home. I don't mind occasionally doing the some jobs in my pajamas, but I like to go out to the studios. I like working with people who know what they're doing to do the stuff. And to go back to your question, what scares me the most? It's not necessarily AI. What is scaring me the most these days is there seems to be a lot of people who don't actually have a lot of knowledge, but have a lot of opinions about certain things that are affecting my industry. That scares me more than like AI or anything like that, where you'll have somebody come and go, uh, like like when they talk about things like where I touched on it a bit, like cultural appropriation, where someone will say, "Well, no, you can't do that because you're not from that culture." Like I'm finding that cultural appropriation, for example, a lot of it seems to stem from Midwest United States, where like they're saying, "No, no, the people in China are pissed that you're doing that." No, they're not. How do you know that? Like you can't, and or the people like, "Oh no, Malaysian people are very upset that you're doing that." How do you know that? Well, I just know that because I would be upset. So the Malaysian people are upset. So that kind of bleeds over into my industry where they're like, "No, you
So you
can't
mean
do
the
those
woke
things."
people, not knowledge people. They're woke people.
Yeah, I guess, and
No
even
offense to the woke people, but to be honest with you, if they got a problem with how China views the way we might do a representation of something, maybe they should look at what happens when they put a black person on the Fast and Furious poster where they minimize them halfway to the point you can't even see them on the fucking poster because they don't accept that shit. So it's like when really you talk about standards, the woke people got it backwards. I mean, every other country that views Taiwan and all these other countries is just lower than them.
you make a good point with that. I was in this conversation the other day about somebody. Now, I understand why there's certain words that have been changed because of TikTok kind of thing, like, unalive. Like when I first heard unalive, I thought that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Like why you would use it. Now I understand why TikTok did it because that there was a whole trend that started on TikTok. But for example, when you talk about somebody saying unhoused rather than homeless, no, they're fucking homeless. These people, like, you don't take away what dignity they have by changing the word that they have because it makes you feel better.
Oh,
Doesn't
but
make
they
them feel
did.
better.
It's no longer child
Uh,
molester. It's now what is it? Minor attracted person. I swear to you, that's real. That's real. And that's
it is
really fucked up.
not.
It is. It
Oh
is.
my
It's really fucked
God.
up. To be
Oh,
honest, it started like 2 years ago when Australia released that study where they talked about not calling shark attacks. They said call them what dangerous encounters.
yeah.
And it was like, no, a fucking shark attack. If a shark bites you and takes off your whole leg, I'm calling that a shark attack. I'm not calling that a dangerous encounter. I'm calling that I just lost my whole right side of my leg and my pelvis. They had a thing too. I mentioned this with Mike Ferrando, which I just thought was hilarious because he didn't believe me until I pulled up the article. But they don't want you to use the term like sea grass. because grass has a bad connotation based on like the history of cannabis and and it's just like, well, hang on a second, that's an actual thing we used for a while, which was sea grass, and then there was a bunch of other things it had in there too, where it's really taken a word and really trying to find, and I've done that personally myself. I've watched movies from talking with film historians and really tried to analyze like the racism, like superheroes being racist, born out of an orgy of a mask. Where did the mask come from? Well, the KKK wore masks. I can understand that, but at the same time, I don't see it ruining my day about shit. Because most of the people that will talk about like civil rights arguments and things like that, they couldn't tell you who Fred Hampton was. They couldn't tell you who some of the most important figures that get neglected by history that aren't being talked about because of the fact that they just have, this is my moral and emotional belief. And look, like I said, if I mean, it stems, I'm not against wokeism. I'm really not. I actually had a talk with a guy a while back. We were talking about the whole trans thing, and he was expecting me to be non-trans person. And I was just like, I don't give a fuck if you want to do whatever. Like, I really don't. Let people be people. I talk to people from all over the board. But then we got into this weird conversation about like listening to intellectuals. And I was like, but what do you base as an intellectual? Because some of the first intellectuals were going around screaming at the top of their roots or roofs of their mouths talking about eugenics. You know, some of the early days of those intellectuals, but the only way to be an intellectual is, and sorry for the rant, but as long as it sounds good, people will buy that shit and they don't ever get punishment for when they are wrong because, oh, they're an intellectual. They just sounded good. All you have to do is
Th-
sound good.
This was the, and we're circling back. We do this often, Robbie. How we're circling back to how we were talking about how with some podcasters, or when some people are just they're saying
Talk shit on
stuff.
me, Casper. I know
Well,
why
there
you
was
wanted to come back on here. No, I'm kidding.
well, there's if they're saying they're saying shit, but they're using lovely words, with no basis. They have a following of people who have never actually researched the topic. They've heard one of
I
the
feel like you're
people in the
calling me
group.
out. It hurts a little bit.
No, no, I would never do
I
that.
really
No.
do try and do research as of recent. I've been
If
studying.
you and your research, you shame a lot of people, I think, because you research a lot of your conversations before they happen, because
Thank
you
you.
want to have, well, you want to have questions. You want to ask, that's,
Yeah.
you want to and you want to hear. Whereas, some of these people where you watch like a podcaster and then you'll watch like the tweets and stuff on X after, and you go, do you even know anything about this topic? You're taking what this guy is saying at face value. Like, have you even looked at it? And they're like, did you know there's a good third of of youths today use TikTok as their search engine.
Because there's a lot of things on TikTok that I think are good information. I've made clips on YouTube. I've watched it grow pretty quickly doing that. I actually enjoy doing the YouTube clips rather than I like doing an episode because it's a minute compared to however long. But there is something about TikTok that I feel like is very important. I know a lot of people don't like it. I didn't like it in the beginning either because I fell asleep with the app on for 7 hours. And I woke up and I was like, oh my God, what did you guys take from me? Because I'm just sitting there in my head scanning at all the things. But the one thing I noticed, which was interesting, was there's a large area of interest I have, and I have not been able to get a lot of people to really talk about it, but it was the drug experiments that were going on with prisoners back in the day that are still kind of going on when we talk about pharmaceutical companies being able to test their products on prisoners. RFK Jr. recently talked about this on one of his campaign things. I was like, hey, I was like, look at that. That's awesome. Someone's actually talking about that because I don't think a lot of people are aware of it. But it was after I had Alan Hornbloom on my podcast, and he went into his book, Acres of Skin, about the dioxide that was being treated on prisoners at Holmesburg Prison. And I made a clip about it and I put it on TikTok, and it trended so quickly. But then I noticed something. It got reset. And when I mean reset was that it was standing at 5,000 views and it had over 600 something likes and then like 700 something reposts. And then when you clicked on it again, it showed the views and it showed the hearts popping up on the video, but it said 0 likes and it says 0 reposts. And then I even mentioned it to when I had Serene Nemi on, however long ago she was last on, and I clipped that and put that up there as me repeating what I was told, and same thing happened. specifically the prisoner experimentation. But one clip I do have on TikTok that's almost at 200,000 views. Can you guess what it is?
No, not that one. Was that the? It's
TikTok is a China app. You know that, right? It's about Unit 731, about how the Japanese experimentation chemical and bioweapons division, that unit killed over 600 something 10,000 610,000 Chinese people. And that has become the main blasted out. It seems like it's being promoted from every aspect on TikTok. I'm still getting likes from when I made that clip months ago. Every time I log into my TikTok, like maybe once a day or something, it's 15, 20 likes and maybe 5 or 6 reposts from a bunch of names that aren't real accounts. They have a bunch of either Japanese lettering or Chinese lettering, or it'll be a user 11110, like a temporary account. That thing is sitting at close to
so what you've
200,000
got.
views.
So what you've got is like a classroom in China, and every morning the teacher comes in, and the first thing he says to everybody in Chinese is, "All right, everyone, make sure to like Robbie's TikTok. Good,
I
good."
wish, I hope. I hope. I can only hope. No, but I think what it is it specifically talks about the horrible Japanese like research division that killed a lot of Chinese people. So you're running on a China app. They're going to promote that out there because technically they're not breaking the truce that they have or the treaty that they have. Someone else is publishing the content. The content best fits what their ideas are, and they're going to push it. YouTube does the same thing. If you make videos about buying cars or spending money or doing these crazy events, YouTube's going to promote you in the algorithm sources. They're not going to do things that are going to be controversial, educational, even Joe Rogan's YouTube. They don't really like him on that platform, but they realize he is a major voice out into the atmosphere right now, which he does get some of his things. He's been checked recently about a couple things he has mispronounced, but it also happens when you're having conversations. You're not going to be able to get every single thing verbatim. My JFK subject knowledge has increased 20,000 fold compared to when I first started talking about JFK. I can answer any questions for you besides
Have
who did
you
it.
have you been fact checked on some of the stuff that you
I've
like
had
to?
some lone nut people comment Gerald Ford never moved a back wound up 6 inches to match a report. What I did was I got 9 different researchers and made 9 different clips all about Gerald Ford having the back wound move up 6 inches. I commented under their comments, and then I also posted the articles that linked into like Washington Post, New York Times. And you know what they did? They edited their comment and changed it. Okay, he might have moved the back wound up, but he never. And it's just like, okay, I introduced you with new information. I'm not look, those guys, the lone nut group, they just have a bias as much as the conspiracy people do. But to my opinion, I just want to know what the truth is of the matter. I don't care what side it falls on, my side or not.
I even get those guys in voiceover work. So every new season that I get when I'm doing Mysteries of the Abandoned, I have at least 3 or 4 emails who come in to comment on my shoddy narrations and my mispronunciation of words. And those are I answer all my fan mail. I don't get, but the pardon me, the last one I got was there's a lovely word in our language called it's macabre. It's Macrabre, and it's pronounced 3 different ways depending on what part of the world you live in. And the amount of flack I got off of that word. Now, for me, I'm in this really odd situation because I was raised in Canada. I live in the UK. I'm doing a show written by Brits for the American audience. And we will get into this. I mentioned it before. We will get into discussions about things like the use of macabre and how you would actually say that, or getting into like a 5 minute conversation with somebody about Caribbean or Caribbean. Which one would you use? I would go, it doesn't matter. It does to some people. And you go, or anti missile and anti missile or missile. Little things like that where they're taking the language to the point where it's like, guys, that's ridiculous. Like, I don't want to, but I get mail, people going, it's missile, not missile. Please get that right, sir. And you're like,
I just think these people need to pick up a second job, to be honest with you.
for
Good
me, my
God.
first thought is, well, at least they're watching.
Like that new Fallout series that came out. based on one of like my all-time favorite video games. That it's a really good series, but I have friends who've never played Fallout that watch and go, "It's so amazing." Well, if you look at the ending, and it's not really spoiling anything for you, but it's literally like 5 seconds. The guy comes up to the horizon and it's Las Vegas in the nuclear wasteland thing, and it cuts to the cutscene leading like a cliffhanger. Well, technically, a part of the original series of Fallout games, New Vegas is not part of the original series. It was by a different company that produced Fallout New Vegas. So a lot of hardcore fans go, "That's canon. That can't happen. You cannot do that." And it's got me in this weird area now where I actually started getting down Zack Snyder's, the whole Snyderverse stuff. Dude, that's a lot deeper than just people releasing director's cuts. That's a lot deeper. That's about he made the Batman versus Superman movie, and it kept coming back with an R rating. And he was like, "What can I do to make this PG-13? Because if you put an R rating on it, you're going to limit the number of people that can see this film." And he kept adjusting and adjusting and adjusting, and finally just went to the studios. "What do you want me to do?" And the studios just said to him, "We just don't like the concept of Batman fighting Superman." And he goes, "That's the movie. What do you mean you don't like it? That's the whole premise of the movie. I can't change that." And they were trying to get him to change it. And he was like, "I can't, what do you want me to do? I can't do Batman and Superman. It's Batman versus Superman." And then he kind of was like, "All right, I'll make you a deal. You make it PG-13, I make my director's cut, and I make it the way I want to make it." And it's kind of like that. I forgot who the Scorsese's whole opinion on how to make a movie. You do one for the studio and you do one for yourself. That's how you do it. You got to do what they want you to do, jump through the hoop, and then make one that you want to do yourself and make it as good as you want.
Like Ridley Scott did with Blade Runner, the director's cut, which is much better kind of thing. But yeah, there are some. I'm a huge Fallout fan. Huge Fallout New Vegas is one of my favorite games. Um, and the thing that happens with this particular thing, at least they didn't destroy it the way they did Halo. Because in Halo they butchered that so badly that it was based on an idea that might have been mentioned in somebody who was in the same room talking about the game, and it was that type of thing where they destroyed so many things about it. Whereas in Fallout, they took some liberties, like the there's they changed the Brotherhood of Steel uh to basically, the Brotherhood of Steel in many ways were the bad guys, kind of, like these. If you were in a same room and you were Brotherhood of Steel was save the robot or save the child, they would save the robot because that was their whole dogma. That was their whole point. That was the reason. Yeah, that was the whole idea behind the Brotherhood of Steel. Save the technology. Um, when that floating fortress thing shows up, that thing pissed off. It looks great in the show, but that thing pissed off so many people because there was only one of them, and it was in Boston or wherever, and it was destroyed. So why is it over here? And then when they talk about the NCR, the NCR had their own. Yeah, I'm not going to get it, but yeah, I have my own feelings.
Well, I believe it's an educational thing.
They took some liberties, is what they did. So.
As much as it's a game, I think what's really important is like there needs to be something that we have to get through a historical platform, which if podcasts aren't going to do it, then it has to come through a form of television. And if documentaries aren't going to be someone's bread and butter, then it has to come through some type of educational platform. And what I mean by that is that when they talk about, they used to tell us that if the cloud is bigger than your thumb, um, you don't have there's no point in running. Something like that, where there was real threats of nuclear disasters coming, bomb shelters being sold to people because they thought at any moment you were going to die. Capturing that feel in a show, making it real for people who are never probably going to experience that or what it was like back in the Cold War days to experience. I enjoyed the hell out of that. I also think they should dive more into the realms of the social elements that come into what the vaults were. The vaults are experiments. I hope they really bring up Vault 69 because that would be really awesome. I don't know if you know much about that vault, but Vault 69 in the actual series was one man and 1,000 women were locked in a vault together.
I can't remember. I'm trying to think of remember the one. There was one guy where was his name Cliff or Clint? Where they meet all the clones. It's all the same guy.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's that one. There's another one where a guy's locked in a vault by himself, and he's given a chest, and the chest is filled with puppets, and he gives all the puppets personalities and voices because he's been locked in this vault for however many years, and eventually the puppets develop their own personalities and become like idle hands, where they start going out and killing people, and he's just like. He's a wastelander walking around with these puppets that have their own personalities. Like that stuff's really important because if you look at like our past record of historical or social experiments, people change. The Stanford prison experiment, whether you consider it succeeded or failed, plenty of other experiments out there, like the one where the had to shock the person that was in another room. You ever watch that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
If you
That was a while
haven't, I
ago.
can pull it up because I actually might want to pull it
No,
up.
I remember that one, and there was the that was a yeah, I remember I think we talked about that one as well on another conversation we had. But yeah, it's those type of experiments where you have to, or where you think, um, have you heard the one about they had a group of women where they were talking about job interviews and they put fake scars on all their faces, like they brought in a makeup artist and put scars in their faces, uh, and said, okay, now you're going to go out and apply for a job. And the whole point of this exercise is to see are they going to hire someone who's heavily scarred on their faces. And just before they went out, they said, "Oh, we're just going to touch some things up, make sure you look great." And they removed the scars off of each of the women and then sent them off. And almost 75% of the group recorded they felt that they were being biased against because of the scars on their faces. Um, or over half the room were like, yeah, they were physically repulsed by me. You could just tell. Um, just me being there. There was no way I was going to get that job. Those type of experiments are quite, um, or that was interesting. Where you have that whole thing where you go, if you convince yourself enough that something's going to happen, then you make it happen. I think so. Yeah, in many ways, I don't think we have enough. Um, if only there was a way that we could do like a social experiment where
In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes and participate in atrocities such as the Holocaust, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Where? Teacher.
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Cloud. Horse. Rock. House. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer. Horse.
Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
You refuse to go on? The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're gonna get a shock. 180 volts.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of
Can't
here.
stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man there. I mean, who's gonna take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Two-thirds of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering a less voltage. Can't you check in and see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
yeah,
dark shit, bro. Dark shit.
Wow. And that's actually there's a lot of that. You have these days we have a lot of white coats out there.
Yeah, I didn't want to hijack it. That I just thought it was really important to play that
No,
because it's one of the most interesting social experiments that I've ever seen, and I know a lot of people kind of it's got a lot of flack of recent
and
years.
it's kind of like what we were talking about in a way where it comes up on that where here you have somebody like he's in this instance, he's willing to just do what the authority figure says, but at some point you could have went, nobody's asking any questions. What am I doing? Why are we doing that? Or they said so many like nowadays when people just walk out of the room, now what they were being offered, it didn't seem like a lot. Like if you remember from like 1963, $4, that's a lot of money in 1963. That'd be like offering someone like $100 kind of
Yeah.
thing, and so it wasn't when people go, oh, it was only $4. No, this is
Well, also
1963.
take into account 1963, a lot of people looked at doctors like they know what they're doing.
Exactly.
A lot more
But
skepticism today.
well, yeah, and that was the thing. So here you have, and that's what I mean by these days we have a lot of people out there who've gone out and bought themselves white coats and are wearing them, and no one's actually questioning what they're saying, just because they seem to be in a position of authority, kind of thing. So that's wow, we that was it. I'd forgotten about that clip. That's quite the
To me, I like watching those old experimental stuff, but a lot of that old experiment stuff, like at schools and stuff like that, where they have certain experiments with kids raise their right hand, their left hand, or do all these types of different things. I just like the seeing what would go on when it comes to social constructs in the way that we view them in our minds.
well, even the social the experiments of when they talked about did you ever have a slow learning class?
I had a class they called enrichment, which I realized they just put all the bad kids in.
We had the same type of class. It was called remedial. But we had a class where
Teacher
they
didn't
used
want
to
to tell me I was retarded. I was like,
wait, well
man,
they had this
fucking.
class they had this class in they had these readers in our class. At the beginning of the class, everyone was given this piece of paper and you had to read it out loud, something. And then depending on how well you read this piece of paper, you were handed a blue book or a brown book. And everybody knew that the people who got the brown book were for people who couldn't read very
They were
well.
shit. They were shit.
Now, at the time, of course, don't know about dyslexia, don't know about people who are having issues with maybe public speaking, don't know any, they don't read very well. And so, but these were the dumb kids. You had the smart kids and the dumb kids. And so they split you right in the room. And as kids, like we knew like what this was all about, kind of thing. And so you're immediately separating the class on that. And this is how old were we then? There would have been like 12.
They did it when you didn't know, and you couldn't just be like, "Hey, wait a minute, this is a test to see if I'm on the spectrum or not."
Yeah. And then you get other things will happen where did you ever do an IQ test when you were a kid, as a kid kind of
Yeah, I
thing?
got like
No.
a 135 or 140.
Well, all I know from my IQ test was that we were in grade 8. No, yeah, grade 8. Yeah, kind of thing. So I would have been, what's grade 8? 13 years old, something like that. And we were supposed to read this chapter in this book kind of thing. And so this one kid takes it, he's looking at it, and he slams his book shut. And teacher goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're supposed to be reading this chapter." He goes, "I'm done." And he looks over to me and goes, are you done?" And I went, "No." And he goes, "You see that kid there? He's got the reading level of a university graduate. If he's not done, you're not done." And then the entire class for the rest of the year hated me, kind of thing. Because I was always the one watch. I was like, "Okay, do I close fast?" So, the teacher wasn't supposed to tell anybody this. Now, I guess this is what it was pointed out on my IQ test somewhere that I could read at an advanced level, but I'd been reading books since I was 3 years old, kind of thing. So that wasn't, a big issue. Doesn't mean, parts of my other psyche were stunted.
I had it where I was placed in a bunch of advanced classes every time we transferred over schools. So I'd be sitting there and be like, all right, guys, you guys know basic algorithms and all this type of stuff. And it's like eighth grade. And I'm like, what the fuck's a basic algorithm? And then they start going, because they were putting me in that based on the IQ stuff. And they didn't realize that I just was getting stoned and not showing up to class half the time. So it was like I didn't know anything basic on that. I could tell you about a bunch of other crazy things, but I couldn't tell you. It's kind of like how my life is now. Besides getting stoned, I just have a bunch of random knowledge in my head that's just like not useful if you put me in like a test setting.
I couldn't tell you what a basic algorithm is. It's sort of like
All right, class, we're talking about advanced Pythagorean's theorem part 2, and I'm like, they fucking what is he
what?
talking about? Didn't you learn this last year? I
Oh
didn't
man,
learn anything last year. I didn't even
last
show up.
year.
Casper, we are going to wrap it though because we're heading up on that 2 hour mark. But I do appreciate the time you always give me to do our chats and everything like that.
I appreciate everything that I learned coming out of these conversations, man. So thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
I learned you were in Hot Wheels at a point.
You'll get. I'll mail you a signature.
Yes, that's what I want. I'm gonna link all your links in the description. But do you want to tell everybody real quick where they can find you?
You can find me I'm the only Kasper Michaels on social media that spells his name with a K. So you can catch me there.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.